It's a pleasure to talk with you at the ICA. I want to tell you about our project Southern Journey, the migrations of the American South, 1790 to 2020. This began as an invitation to give 3 lectures at Louisiana State University in the US, and those are normally small books. But we decided to try something more ambitious. We've sent this book to the exhibition. It's a beautiful book, sort of coffee table size, atlas-like with all these beautiful maps in it. But we also knew that with digital capacities that we could reach a much larger audience, especially people who don't have access to the book, and also use some of the capacities of Esri's story maps to be able to show the capacities of cartography in new ways. So it's a challenging project because you have an area the size of continental Europe over more than 2 centuries with shifting boundaries and with different ethnicities who are cohabiting in the same space in sharply different capacities. So we pull the different strands apart of the white population, the Black population, the indigenous population, the Latin American population, and the Asian American population, and show them with a common vocabulary so that people can see how these groups made each other's history and how they made their own history. So let me give you a quick tour of the different parts of Southern Journey. It's a complex project with more than 80 maps, so we won't have time to see them all, but we can get some idea of the basic ideas of it. Now, one of the things that you can see is that we use animation. And we're showing here the dispossession of the indigenous people across millions of square miles in the American South. This is especially helpful because Americans have heard of the Trail of Tears in which the Cherokee were dispossessed, but I think most people don't have any idea of the scale of the area that basically became the Deep South was dispossessed in just a few years. We use other techniques the fundamental technique of Southern Journey is this one. Areas that are varying shades of blue is where the population of that ethnicity, in this case, Black people, decreased. In these small areas defined by latitude and longitude, the hex bins, smaller than county boundaries because the counties are constantly changing in this rapidly moving south. You can see here the enslaved population is being depopulated from the oldest part of the American South, the Chesapeake, and from the areas of the low country of South Carolina, which are giant rice and cotton plantations, and being moved into those very areas that I showed you before that had been taken from the American Indians. This becomes known as the Black Belt of the United States. And it's a pattern that continues up to today. You can look at voting returns for our most recent elections and see that the patterns established before the American Civil War are still the patterns that shape much of American life today. So after slavery was abolished in the American Civil War and Black people were free to help shape their own lives in new ways, we're able to show the great migration of that you may have heard of in during World War I era, when the migrations of immigrants from Europe, many of them Italian, were actually stopped. And finally, the Black people of the South had a chance to move to the cities of the Northeast. Well, this is during a later war, World War II, and we're seeing that there's still millions of Black people who are moving to the cities of the Northeast. What you can also see through story map and unfolding over time, you can see this continues through the 1950s, continues through the 1960s, and in some ways even growing in intensity. But starting in the 1970s, we're seeing a new pattern. Black people are still growing in the cities of the North, but they're starting to migrate to the many cities of the American South. They're moving to Florida and Texas, Atlanta, Memphis, places that you have heard of. This is the first time in American history that Black people are choosing to move to the South. Other people who are choosing to move to the South are immigrants from Latin America and Asia. This map uses one of the capacities of story maps to show a remarkable change. So we swipe and we can see from 1990 to 2000, people from Latin America were moving to Texas and Florida and to some of the cities of the Upper South, but mainly to California and to the Northeast. But in the very next decade, from 2000 to 2010, the Latin American immigration from Mexico and Central America and South America begins to disperse across the United States and across the South. This is when a lot of people from Latin America begin living in rural areas, working in food processing plants, even as they're also migrating to the American South. We can compare the Asian population, which changes much less, but we can also see how the patterns of the population from the 19th century begin to change. You can see in Appalachia, large numbers of people leaving in the late 20th century, but also in the so-called Rust Belt. So this puts the American South in the context of all of American history, of international history, and uses the power of a common vocabulary of geography to explain patterns of millions of people across hundreds of years and across millions of square miles. Nathaniel and Justin have made Southern Journey at the Digital Scholarship Lab at the University of Richmond. We've already won some awards with this, and I'm so grateful to have a chance to work with them as they've developed these remarkable new tools for understanding this important part of American, we think, world history. Thanks very much.